Next, we have the Sustainable Mobility Plan.
Thank you, Chair. One moment, just pulling up my screen. All right, thank you, Chair Gokin, members of the Traffic and Mobility Commission. I am Nathan Schmidt, the Transportation Planning and Mobility Manager. This item before you is consideration of Carlsbad's Sustainable Mobility Plan. So the recommended action for this item is to receive the draft report and support staff's recommendation to adopt the Carlsbad Sustainable Mobility Plan. So this slide here, this is just a brief outline of the presentation. We'll begin with a overview of the prior Traffic and Mobility Commission. We'll take a look at the background and the development of the SMP document, do a brief summary of the SMP. I know since you've seen this before, we'll try to keep that fairly brief, and the main focus of our presentation will be a review of the ad hoc committee's input, the changes that were made, and then also the recent public feedback survey and the next steps for the SMP. So the draft SMP was first presented to the Traffic and Mobility Commission on April 6, 2020. At that meeting, the Commission cited several concerns with the plan, including the project prioritization and the project recommendations. Those are detailed in the minutes attached in Exhibit 3. So instead of approving or recommending adoption of the SMP, the TMC voted to create an ad hoc committee. And that committee was intended to help guide the plan with the updates which the Commission felt was appropriate, provide more public outreach, and just provide a very more interactive process in the update. So since that time, back in April, city staff has held several meetings with the ad hoc committee to review and update the document in close collaboration with city staff and the project consultant, Chen Ryan. So the SMP has undergone an extended project schedule. The whole process started back in the summer of 2018 with the existing conditions assessment, identification of the stakeholder engagement plan. As you can see here, that the plan was then processed and developed throughout the fall of 2018. In winter, through winter of 2019, the project prioritization process was developed and refined. The draft document was prepared and the final stakeholder engagement events were provided. Then recently in spring of 2020, it was reviewed by the Traffic and Mobility Commission in April. And as discussed, it was not supported by the Commission. And we commenced on the process of working to guide the development of the update with the ad hoc committee. So since that time, again, we've conducted numerous ad hoc planning committees to review the plan. We've developed, I believe, 2 sets of internal drafts for the plan committee's feedback. Then in fall of 2020, the current draft before you today was submitted for review. As part of that process, the draft was submitted to the public for review from November 5th to the 27th. And now, today's date, we are back in front of the full Traffic and Mobility Commission with the updated plan for review again. Next steps beyond that are to revise the SMP document based upon any comments we received from the Commission for eventual City Council review. And we're shooting for January of 2021 for that. So a brief introduction, the Sustainable Mobility Plan, or the SMP, it's a compilation of various multimodal components into one comprehensive planning document. It establishes all the guidelines for the aspects of multimodal mobility in the city of Carlsbad, and it provides a framework for outreach associated with each of these components and the outcomes from there within. It's really intended to be a roadmap for us as staff to provide more safe, connected, and accessible transportation options moving forward. As previously mentioned, it's really considered a plan of plans. Here are the 12 planning documents that were the guiding documents that provided input into the Sustainable Mobility Plan. Those include things such as the 2007 Bicycle Master Plan, 2008 Pedestrian Master Plan, Village and Barrio Master Plan, about a dozen or so plans here, all outlined on this slide. We're very much the guiding documents behind the SMP. An overview of community engagement. So it was a very extensive engagement process. The project designed and implemented an engagement plan to guide outreach, starting with this started with a wide range of stakeholders and community members that would inform the development of the SMP. That stakeholder working group was really at the core of guiding the plan in the initial stages. 4 meetings were held with the stakeholder working group that included members from the local business community, residents, local advocates, and included a diverse set of about 25 representatives from various organizations and populations throughout the city. As mentioned there, the working group had about 4 meetings at key decision points along the project planning process. They were heavily involved in developing a lot of the additional recommendations that were provided as part of the SMP, and also in guiding the initial steps for the project prioritization process. Additionally, focus and intercept surveys were held on, and initial research was conducted to help the project really kind of provide a better understanding of the transportation habits and preferences of the local community. There was a project website that was developed, and social media program was implemented to inform the general public of the plan activities. Some few key events included farmers market booths and a community presentation were conducted as requested to some of the local groups, such as the Chamber of Commerce, close outreach with the Carlsbad Unified School District, and large employers such as Viastat and the city's sustainability team were highly involved in this process. The MetroQuest survey was also a key component of outreach. Through this process, we received a total of about 137 respondents took the survey, and this was all in regards to the prioritization of the SMP, and included a detailed mapping exercise where people could go in and identify specific projects on a GIS map and focus them there. And then also a visioning exercise, which asked the respondents what their overall vision for mobility in Carlsbad was. Beyond that, and really as guided by the Traffic and Mobility Commission, was your review and the several meetings that we had with the TMC ad hoc committee. We're all part of that community engagement overview. So in regards to the document itself, it's 7 chapters. Oops. The first chapter is the introduction, and this sets forth the SMP's vision, provides the legislative framework. It summarizes the overall vision that was articulated by the stakeholder working group. Chapter 2 includes the existing mobility network. This provides essentially a snapshot of the existing physical environment in Carlsbad, the existing programs, practices, and policies that were related to walking and cycling throughout the city. Chapter 3 included the guiding principles and emerging trends. This presents an overarching view of the principles that were motivated the planning process, as well as several innovative planning concepts that inform the SMP's recommendations as part of later chapters. Chapter 4 was the community perspectives, and that provided a summary of the public engagement process and the outcomes that informed the later recommendations. Chapter 5 was the planned mobility networks, and this included the networks for all modes. So that was the bike network, the walking network, the trail network, and transit access network. Chapter 6 was the proposed mobility programs, and this was, instead of the specific project recommendations, this was the key programmatic recommendations for programs such as safe routes to school, cycling education, transportation demand management, and active transportation monitoring. And chapter 7, which was the final chapter, was the action plan. This presented a consolidated list of projects on the entire project database. It brought all of those previous projects from the dozen or so plans that went into the SMP and provided a prioritization process and phasing plan for future implementation. So beyond the main document, there's also an extensive appendices that were included. This included an existing conditions report, which which really was the summary, the starting point of all the SMP planning efforts. The complete streets design guidelines. This is a very key element to the plan. It's essentially a complete streets design guidelines that the city will use to implement these projects, starting from, planning level, which is the lines on the maps. The complete streets design guidelines are those key engineering design features, and looking at ways how those will be implemented on our local streets. The communications plan is also included in the appendices, and that's a summary of the outreach and the public engagement process that was utilized. And then safe routes to school, several chapters in the appendices here, including the walk audits, which were reports that were prepared by the project team when they went out into the field and walked all the paths to the surrounding school networks, identified constraints, opportunities, issues. This also includes the safe routes to school improvement maps, which provide high planning level recommendations of various improvements around each of the school sites. The other elements are the project scoring details, so provides all the detail behind how the projects were prioritized and the full SMP project database. And that's what staff will use when we're trying to get the details on all of the hundreds of projects that are included in the Sustainable Mobility Plan. So one of the primary elements of the plan are the plan networks. These are the 4 networks in itself. It's the SMP takes what we called a layered network approach, meaning it takes all these modes and layers them all together, and makes that consideration and how the connections are made between the modes, how they complement each other, and really getting to focus on how these modes together can increase safety, connectivity, and competitiveness of walking, cycling, and transit versus just taking your personal vehicle. So that's a very brief summary of the plan itself. This next section, I just wanted to cover really what we discussed during the T&MC ad hoc committee process and the primary updates that were performed as we worked through the process with the ad hoc group. So as we reviewed the plan, the group discovered numerous editorial revisions and texts, changes to the maps and graphics. We took a closer look at the existing sidewalk conditions map, and we made some updates to that, made sure that was updated with the city's latest and greatest information on any gaps in the sidewalk network, any issues in sidewalk deterioration. We clarified the multimodal level of service that was provided in the SMP. There was some confusion. The MMLOS and the SMP is different than what the city uses for monitoring and review of private development projects. So there was some confusion there, and we made sure that was clear. We also revised and expanded the mobility hubs analysis and transportation demand management sections. We refined the transformative corridors. We really looked to kind of scale those back and provide some key corridors that would provide citywide connectivity improvements versus whereas before it was more just focused on the main arterials. Then we also added a section in regards to the economic benefits of active transportation. A few other key highlights that I would like to point out. In Chapter 5, this was a great recommendation from the committee. We added a roundabout policy, and that would be where roundabouts would be considered on existing streets where they could be effectively address safety or traffic operation issues, or in new development projects where intersection control is being considered. So this is a new policy for traffic engineering staff to really focus on, hey, when we're looking at various intersection improvements, to really consider if a roundabout is a feasible alternative moving forward. Another significant change was in Chapter 5 for the recommended bikeway network. So previously there was a very large network of Class 4 protected bikeways included in the plan. Essentially all arterial streets included some type of Class 4 protected bikeway. And working with the group and very much in agreement with staff that we really sought to scale back that network of Class 4 bikeways, essentially scaling them back to enhanced buffered Class 2 bike lanes. So those are wider bike lanes with a striped buffer, versus a Class 4, which is a bike lane that is separated from the vehicle lane with some type of physical protection That could be, as example from the earlier project with the actual curb providing the physical protection to soft fit posts or plastic buffers. I think in looking at this, staff was really in agreement with the ad hoc committee that we need to take a critical look of where the Class 4 protected bikeways are applied. So that's why we sought to scale back that network and converting most of those to Class 2 enhanced buffered bike lanes. Another update was just in regards to Chapter 6, cycling education. The group felt that that was a very important program, so we further highlighted that, highlighting the need for cycling education throughout Carlsbad. The city has previously offered smart cycling for adults and for children, and this is really a key program that our bicyclists can use to really learn the rules of the road. And that's how, it's a key element of bicycle safety and keeping, new users or experienced users who may not really know how to cycle and keeping them safe. Another significant update was in Chapter 6, the Safe Routes to School program. So with that, we developed a much more extensive, detailed program framework. We identified specific responsibilities and specific partners that we could use to provide the city with plans that we can develop for local safe routes to school plans. So identifying who the key stakeholders are and who the key stakeholders are both on the city side and the school side and the public, so that we can work with local schools to further the plans that were recommended in the appendices of the Sustainable Mobility Plan. Another element in Chapter 6 was the Active Transportation Monitoring Framework. So this is a program that essentially would allow us to measure annual increase in active transportation use. This would be done through things such as bicycle and pedestrian counts, safety data, TDM data that we are acquiring through the TDM survey process. Within the SMP, we've identified probably a dozen or so, a network of potential count locations throughout the city that we can use as a starting point to really start, keying in on some of the key metrics that we want to track as part of a monitoring framework. With this program, it would allow us to determine changes in active transportation infrastructure and see how that is resulting in either increased bike riders, increased pedestrians, looking at things such as, how does this impact air quality, and also in looking at ways to measure impacts to traffic safety. So all part of that active transportation monitoring framework. In Chapter 7, the project prioritization. So this was a section that was, it was an interesting update. I mean, the committee had lots of great thoughts, and I think we came up with a better process for project prioritization. Starting with really the reason was that a lot of the projects were originally clustered in the Carlsbad Village area. That's where the highest priority projects were. And looking at this with the ad hoc committee, we really sought to provide a way to provide a more equal distribution of projects throughout the city. Some interesting suggestions were to add a criteria for vehicle miles traveled so that we could focus projects in areas with higher VMT generating areas, really providing higher emphasis on safety, higher emphasis on those transformative corridors to really disperse the projects better throughout the city. Previously, it was more emphasis on density. So now you're really kind of getting that emphasis on density so we can have some nice kind of citywide active transportation networks. And I think the final kind of update here was just in regards to the Complete Streets design guidelines. We got some really good input from the committee in regards to the design of pedestrian and bicycle facilities. We looked at more options again for the Class 2, the buffered bikeways, and we really looked at ways to kind of refine how we would consider Class 4 protected bikeways and consider them when appropriate, and specifically looking at some of those intersection conflicts that could potentially be created with the Class 4. So that's the update. So after the draft plan was prepared and reviewed by the ad hoc committee, we submitted the full draft plan for the public review in November. From that process, we received 312 responses received. The plan itself was advertised through various social media outlets. The website was advertised to the stakeholder working group, community groups, school groups. So we got a really nice response rate and a really kind of broad spectrum of all ages responded to the survey. Just wanted to highlight kind of a few key interesting results. Staff is still working on a more formal report that we will provide to City Council in regards to the survey responses, but these are just a few interesting elements that I wanted to highlight here. So one of the plans, the first question, was, does the plan increase access to travel options through enhanced walking, bicycling, and public transportation systems? As you can see, the red and the orange color, these are people in disagreement. Overall, it was pretty well supported with 42% strongly agreeing and 37% somewhat agreeing that the plan did offer ways to increase multimodal access. Another question was the plan network, could it make it easier for me to choose other ways for getting around Carlsbad besides driving alone in my car? A little less, in terms of favorability on this question here, not a real surprise, but again, 31%, 30%, saying about 60% there saying that they do agree that it would provide them options beyond just driving their car. And one slide here, just the last in regards to the survey response, is how well do the recommended improvements meet the community's needs for the following modes. So as you can see here, again, the red and the orange, those are less favorable, and then the green colors are more favorable. So you can see the various pedestrian network, the trail network, the bicycle network, and access to transit here. So with that, that's an overview of the update process and the SMP document in itself. The next steps will be for staff. We will incorporate any commission comments or feedback that we need to, and update the SMP as needed prior to going to City Council. And then we will go forward to City Council and recommend them to adopt the Sustainable Mobility Plan. A few notes just in regards to what happens after adoption. So the next steps for staff would be to develop a detailed implementation strategy. That was one element that staff felt could be further developed. This is taking a more engineering look at some of those high priority projects that were developed in the SMP. As part of that, we would conduct an engineering preliminary feasibility study of those projects. That would include like preparing concept plans, more detailed cost estimates, so we could get a better handle on the implementability of these projects. Because beyond that, the city staff would intend to use these projects as the roadmap to really guide the development of the city's active transportation network. One other point I just wanted to highlight are a few other key projects that were identified as a result of the Sustainable Mobility Plan. First is the Safe Routes to School. This is a project that staff intends to forward, starting with that Safe Routes to School planning framework that was developed as part of the document. Also, the Active Transportation Monitoring Program and Traffic Safety and Analysis Monitoring through the local roadway safety plan. So recommended actions are to adopt the Carlsbad Sustainable Mobility Plan. And that concludes staff's presentation.
That was quite a presentation.
All right, it's quite a document.
I know. Do we have public comments?
We do not have public comments.
Okay. Commissioner comments or questions? Okay, I see Commissioner Linky. Make sure when you put your hands that you put it more on the camera because of the blue screen or green screen. Yeah, I see Commissioner. Sometimes I don't see you. Okay, I see Commissioner Linky, then I see Commissioner Perez, Vice Chair. So we're gonna go in that order. Commissioner Linky.
I had a few questions first.
Okay.
I was curious how much the total cost was for this, just so that we can put an exclamation point on how important it is that it's right. So I looked back and I saw that the there was a $300,000 grant from Caltrans, and that required $375,000 in matching money, and then $30,000 in staff time. So is it accurate to say that the total cost of this was around $700,000? Or is that?
Yeah, I would need to check that, Commissioner Linky. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact amount. That honestly sounds a little high, but I would need to go back and look through the project history.
And did we end up getting the grant for $300,000 to pay for it?
We did receive the grant to pay for partially.
Okay. One thing that I was concerned about, well, first of all, I should say that thanks to Chen Ryan and staff for, we spent a lot of effort on this, and I think it's significantly better. I still have some concerns. One of them is the implementation time. So it's a new section, and it says that the top 10 priority projects would be projected to be completed within 5 to 10 years. And then the next 20 prioritization, 11 through 30, I guess, would be completed in years 11 through 20. And then the rest of them would be more than 20 years down the road. And so I guess I have some concerns about, we're talking about just doing initially one project per year, and then for the first 5 to 10 years, and then 2 projects per year after that. Is that the bandwidth that we have available to do these things?
I think that's
I can jump in on that one. As you can imagine, the implementation plan is going to require more detailed analysis to do feasibility analysis on the prioritized projects. So a part of that will be working with our finance department to look at what discretionary funds are available, of course, and grant funds and all funding opportunities for us to really get a refined plan pulled together on what we can afford to build for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
So that was just our kind of initial thoughts on what we could hopefully achieve, but it hasn't been well vetted by no means.
right. And if I could just add, of course, we don't have any cost data to associate with these projects, and that's something that we would recommend taking a much closer look at so we can have a better idea of cost.
Yeah, then my last question, I have comments too, but the last question is related to the local coastal program. So it's almost the equivalent of a general plan, but it's only in coastal regions. And I looked at that local coastal plan update, and they have a series of pedestrian, trail, bicycle, and transit maps, just like the SMP does. But those maps seem to be different in some areas, and it's almost like there's been 2 parallel paths going on, and they're not entirely consistent with each other. So I don't know if staff has any comment on why those are different. And then secondly, I submitted a comment for that, saying that I think that the Traffic and Mobility Commission probably should be able to review that local coastal plan update, since it has so many mobility related issues in it.
That's an excellent point, Commissioner Linky, and I think that's something that we will need to do just to make sure that our programs are consistent. We can look at reconciling the two.
Okay. And then I do have some comments, but I want to let the rest of the commissioners ask questions before I do that, if that's okay.
Did we have, I believe, Vice Chair Perez had questions or comments?
I'm good. If
Commissioner want to make.
Okay. Commissioner Linky, do you want to finish, or do you? I don't know if you're in the zone right now, but.
Well, I didn't want to monopolize the time, but I've spent so long in this. I will make some comments. So I think it's a lot better than it was. There's a lot of improvements that Mr. Schmidt described. But I think I think what I'd like either to change in the SMP or maybe just in the staff report that goes with it, it would be to list some of the limitations and what the commission thinks needs to be done to implement it, because I just don't want this, and whether it costs $300,000 or $700,000, it was a very expensive multi-year planning effort, and I don't want it to sit in the drawer. I think the 12 plans that it combines, a lot of those 12 plans are sitting in a drawer gathering dust, or sitting on a computer server collecting electronic dust, and I believe that staff doesn't necessarily refer to it, and I want to give a case study of what I think. So I prepared a few slides. If in the absence of any objection, I have Mr. Schmidt put them up. And the first slide is my view of the things that are limitations that I'd like to include. The slide after that one. So one of the significant things that was removed was related to multimodal level of service. Originally, the consultant was supposed to compare the city's MMLOS point systems to other systems and establish the baseline conditions and assess the performance of pedestrian, bicycle, and transit networks to help identify the gaps in our system. Instead, it sort of now just reflects the fact that there's a separate effort that the ad hoc MMLOS committee is doing. So I think that's one of the big limitations. Second one is the first mile, last mile gaps. The SMP consolidates previously proposed projects into one database, but it doesn't include, as it originally proposed, its own analysis to reveal gaps and make specific recommendations for other improvements, or evaluate them for feasibility and competitiveness. That was in the original scope of work. So I just want to emphasize that that was left out. And then on a related note, originally the SMP was supposed to provide a comprehensive review of the city's transit and TDM planning efforts. And then there was a long list of individual strategies that were going to be studied. Plus there was supposed to be an estimate of greenhouse gas reductions and vehicle mile travel reductions for the climate action plan. And that was left out as well. And most of these, I think it was like a mutual agreement between staff and the consultant that these would be left out. But these are important things that now we need to go forward and study. Next one is safe routes to school. The SMP was originally supposed to include planning based on some relatively extensive meetings with school officials, parents, and other interested community members. And it contains a lot of data on safe routes to schools, but it was largely computer generated and sometimes doesn't reflect the actual conditions at the schools. So at this point, it refers more to a planning framework that we need to do to implement going forward. And Mr. Schmidt already referred to the fact that this is sort of a new program that it's going to trigger, but I think should be listed as one of the limitations. And a bicycle education program as well there. And then the most significant limitation, I think, is that it doesn't provide the feasibility and estimated costs or provide any conceptual plans, which was part of the original plan. And I think Mr. Schmidt already described the fact that the thing staff is now going to have to do is look at the feasibility and estimated costs. And without that, the prioritization system that we have in place that we spend a lot of time on, it's really not useful. I mean, it provides some information, but without knowing the feasibility and cost of the projects, the scoring just isn't really reflecting what we should do. And then the last one is my concern about the current timeline was to only do 1 or 2 projects a year for the next 20 years, which doesn't seem like a great, great deal of effort. Okay, next slide. All right, so Mr. Schmidt actually listed several of these already. So I would say the combination of the previous slide and this slide is what I would like to inform the city council that the SMP is I don't want to be negative about it. I want to say that it's a valuable tool that can be used to consolidate all the projects from the previous plans and use as a database for staff to do it. But there are limitations on the previous slide. And without doing the tasks listed on this slide, we won't be able to implement it, including developing a realistic MMLOS point system, TDM program, Safe Routes to School program, having staff develop feasibility and costs on the projects and the project list, a way to report to the public the progress on these projects, which is part of the Caltrans checklist to get grant funding, active transportation monitoring program, which is huge, and safety monitoring program, which Mr. Schmidt already referred to. All right, so now that's sort of where my recommendation is going to go, that we recommend that the City Council adopt this, but with these caveats. But I just want to spend a few minutes, if you will indulge me, to sort of relay a case study, an actual real world case where I just don't think that, I think these plans tend to go sit in a drawer. Okay, so this, hang on a second, I've lost my place. All right, so this is a project, and I won't name it. The project itself isn't important, but this is a project that's just north of La Costa Avenue. This was approved last week by the Planning Commission. And according to the staff report for today's item, the SMP in its project list is supposed to mitigate the environmental impacts of this type of growth and development to help achieve the goals of the Climate Action Plan. And this slide is showing in red where the project is on the general plan typology map. So the purple, because La Costa Avenue is highlighted in purple, that means it's prioritized for bicycles and pedestrians. Next slide, please. Okay, and this slide shows the project area from 3 figures that I just copied out of the Sustainable Mobility Plan. In the left figure, the blue highlighting on La Costa Avenue and the surrounding streets, and the green circles indicate priority corridors and intersections for enhanced pedestrian treatments. And that's a quote from the SMP. And this also is listed in the 2015 Carlsbad Active Transportation Planning document. So that's the 12 documents that went into this SMP, that this was, the project was in there. And there's a focus now that we've been talking about roundabouts, which I'll get into in a minute. The upper right figure is from the SMP, and that shows the pedestrian quality in the area. So you can see it's red in a large part. And the lower right one is the bicycle stress from the SMP, and that's also red. So this is not a great area. So even though it's prioritized for pedestrians and bicycles, it's not great right now. Next slide, please. Here's a satellite view. So the red area is where the project is going. You can see that there are many destinations south of the project that would be great to access on foot or on bike. That includes a bus stop, a church, Stagecoach Park, which the Planning Commission spent a lot of time describing how the residents would want to use Stagecoach Park, 2 schools, and several other things. And I numbered a couple of key intersections, number 1 and 2 there. Next slide, please. Okay, the development will also have a connecting sidewalk that connects right where intersection 2 is. So intersection 1 is Calle to Mateo, and intersection 2 is Camino de los Coches. And next slide, please. This is a street level view of Calle to Mateo, and the complex, the condo complex, is off to the right. It's a 45-mile-per-hour area. It's got 2 vehicle lanes going in both directions with center turn lanes. So it's not a particularly friendly intersection for pedestrians or bicyclists. And next slide, please. These are the bus stops next to it, so they're just poles sticking out of the ground. Next slide, please. And this is the other intersection number 2, where that connecting sidewalk is. And again, it's a wide area, higher speed traffic going around it. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so how do we get a project done there that would help the pedestrian and bicyclists as suggested in the SMP and in the active transportation strategy. So as we've seen, the city is now saying that they never intended to maintain level of service D for pedestrians or bicyclists or transit for MMLOS, and it's only applicable when developments occur. But despite me pointing out this sort of conditions in this area to the staff and the Planning Commission, no improvements at those intersections are planned. So they're just going to have stop signs there. And if you're on foot or on bike, you're just at your own will to try to get across safely. This development previously had committed to putting traffic signals and a traffic signal interconnect at both of those intersections. And I suggested that that money could be repurposed maybe towards looking at roundabouts or some other, crosswalks or something to make it safer there. But it was approved without any of those conditions. Okay, next slide. So project 92 is on the SMP plan in that region, and it's listed as priority number 78 out of 95. And with the phasing that's suggested that it's going to take over 25 years to get to doing this project. So I think it's really a lost opportunity that a developer put themselves there. There aren't that many places left in Carlsbad where sizable developments would be there to fund projects like this. And yet none of these MMLOS type projects that I proposed to staff and the developer, despite its presence in the active transportation strategy, and they know it's in the SMP coming up, that it was just completely ignored. So it's a question to staff, or a challenge is how do we pay for and build these in a timely fashion if this is how things are working. Okay, now I'm going to quickly go through a few other things. Next slide, please. That's 30 more seconds here. There's 3 other large developments that have the documentation has been submitted in the last several months. They rely heavily on transit to mitigate their traffic impacts because they're putting a lot of cars onto already congested streets, some of them exempt 55-mile-per-hour streets. And the bus stops there right now generally only have 0 to 3 boardings per day, so they're very underutilized. Yet in every one of these cases, despite many requests by me, the only thing they're requiring the developer to add is a bench and a trash can to those bus stops. And just you cycle through the next slides quickly. These are the examples of these bus stops. So this is on El Camino Real near Kelly Drive. It's just a sign sticking out. So all they have to do is stick a trash can and a bench there and they're good to go. Next slide. Another one on College, just a sign sticking out now, bench and a trash can. Next slide. Add a bench and a trash can there on Palomar Airport Road. Next slide. Another one there. Next slide. Another one there. And the final slide, I think, is next. And there's an example of where a bench and a trash can has been added, and that's supposed to fix the transit. So I guess this is sort of frustrating to me that we have this planning document. How do we make sure that it gets utilized, and who's going to pay for things? And if the city doesn't want to do it and they don't want to have developers do it, how do we accomplish this task?
Does staff want to comment on anything?
I'll jump in. Those are excellent case studies, Commissioner Linky, and your points or your questions are great questions. You've also mentioned, and I know it's a commission priority to review the traffic impact fee for the city. And I think that's a big component to what your questions revolve around. There's also been discussions about updating the mobility element. It's been 5 years. It's a very progressive mobility element, but it has not been updated since 2015. So maybe it's time to look at that. The growth management plan has served the city very well, and a lot of the improvements have been constructed as a part of that plan. But your case study, and your points are valid points. And I guess that's what I would suggest is as we look at the traffic impact fee moving forward and see what we need to do to get projects on the books that we can then find nexus between the developments as applicable by law, because the state laws are always changing, and see what we can get the developers to pay for as a part of their projects.
Okay. I would like to know, Commissioner Wanamaker had a comment or a question, so I'd like to hear that.
Okay, I applaud and want to encourage the use of roundabouts wherever possible because of their impact on a tight community where it just is a natural slowing of traffic. I don't know how well they work for pedestrians, but they do have the effect of slowing traffic, and I certainly encourage that. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Commissioner Pensier.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank Commissioner Linky for being able to articulate his points. And as one of my comments, I want to suggest that the commission consider having him go to the city council meeting where this sustainable mobility plan is presented to bring up some of these issues and with potential solutions that maybe the staff can help him with before that. I feel my area of expertise is in the cycling area. And one of the things that I think we can do in the short term is look at that first mile, last mile, look at bottlenecks, look at areas where, I would ride here except. And some of these areas are pretty obvious, like to the train station, Poinsettia train station. The first half mile from the train station is a high-speed road without bike lanes and without the space, with no sharrows. There's nothing there. It wouldn't be too difficult to at least provide something there, and maybe it's as simple as paint. There are other areas in the city where this would take place as well. One of the issues he mentioned right at first was the MMLOS system that we're using. And we have an ad hoc committee on that, and we are just starting to look at that. And one of the issues that we've had is that it's been used by the system we have in place now does not recognize the differences in bicycle facilities with respect to things like topography. In other words, where there needs to be a climbing lane, there needs to be space for a bike lane. Where the roads are steeper and downhill, maybe not so much. Typically, bike lanes, for example, have a safe speed limit of around 15 miles an hour. Once you're going faster than that, you really probably need to get out of there to avoid being right hooked or left crossed. One of the things that we're doing now is starting to look at not just where crashes occur in the city, which is what the SMP did, but why they happened and what was the root cause. In doing that myself, I found that right hooks are the #1 cause of crashes in Carlsbad, followed closely by #2, which is left crosses. And yet the facilities you use don't necessarily address those causes. If you just put dots on a map, it doesn't tell you anything. So we really need to look at that. That's that local road safety program that we are going to do at some point. So there are lots of things right now that need to be done so that we can implement some of these projects that are not very expensive. We can do them, for example, if we're resurfacing a road, if all we're going to do is restripe and provide more space, like expanded bike lanes. There are things we can do to move this thing along so it doesn't take 25 years to get to where we are. I won't be here then, so that's not going to do me any good, but I'm one of those people that I can live with whatever you've got out there. I can ride anywhere. But in order to get other people interested in doing that, we do have to eliminate some of these areas where they just don't feel safe. And just as one example I'll give, I use Jefferson a lot to go shopping at several different stores out in either Oceanside or Carlsbad. And when I was doing that a year ago, I saw one father with his daughter on the back of a bike at one of these trail bikes where she just has a rear wheel and the front of her bike is connected to his bike. And I saw them on Jefferson as they were approaching the school. And when they got to the overpass of I-5, they always got off their bikes and the bike lane ends, and then they walked across the sidewalk. Probably, number one, because it's too steep, but number two, also because it just doesn't feel comfortable riding on the sharrows there. And quite frankly, I don't feel very comfortable there either. There's a sight distance problem. And this is something that could be addressed that would make this critical pathway much more usable for a lot more people. There's no sidewalks over there. That was something that Commissioner Wanamaker brought up last month. So some of these things we can look at now, I think we can do pretty quickly, very cheaply. And so that those we can do outside of this. Another thing, just one more thing I want to mention, and that is the fact that one of the oldest project that's been pulled into this is the 2007 Bicycle Master Plan. In 2007, sharrows were not even included in the help me with the name of this. It's the it's not the, well, actually in the California Vehicle Code, but also in the document that allows them to be placed. So, you know, this is something that probably should be brought up to date, and we can probably get a grant from probably Sandag or somebody else to bring this thing up to date, which would help considerably in, I think, solving some of these problems quickly. So, okay, that's all I have to say. I can't see it any better than Steve anyway.
Thank you, Commissioner Pensier. I see next was Vice Chair Perez, and then I'll go to Commissioner Fowler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just wanted to, for Nathan on the slides, it's great slides. I really appreciate all the effort and time you put into that. I just wanted to put one note on I think there's one slide where it has the safe route to school, where it shows the kids crossing the street. There is a bus right there that's parked in the red, and it's clearly in the red, so maybe we could kind of take that out. I don't know if that's more of a lighter moment on that. So,
Thank you.
Out of the whole thing, you know, with the ad hoc for the SMP, I really wanted to personally thank Commissioner Pensier, Commissioner Linky, and Chair Gokin for their work on this. I know this has spent a lot of time working on this and working with the consultants. So I just wanted to tip my hat off to the team that worked on that. But getting into this, I just wanted to do two comments. I have two comments. Is that, you know, for the MMLOS, this to me is a really big thing in trying to get this really fine tune. And the reason why I say that is, as you know, I'm part of the Housing Element Advisory Committee. And one part about this that Commissioner Linky made a comment on is the differences in the presentations, on our systems within Carlsbad. And unfortunately, for our housing element, which we put in things like topological, and traffic and DMT and transportation, to show the citizens of, areas that are crucial in making decisions for placing new developments. One thing that we're going to be really missing is our MMLOS, which is our traffic. And I think, with us trying to come up with the MMLOS on this part, and then also with the housing element, not being able to present that into the current cycle of this housing element. To me, I was just like, oh, I really wish we could, kind of coordinate together to see if we can, come up with something so that we can present this to the citizens of Carlsbad. So I think for me, I think that's something that we could really, maybe in the next round or anything like that, we can try and coordinate and, really help out the different departments, and also, help with the citizens to make a cognizant choice on, where are we going forward for the future of Carlsbad in regards to traffic and also for housing. And then the last thing I wanted to just comment is in regards to, parking. I think we have a lot of things we need to understand, and I really appreciate Mr. Lanky's presentation on kind of the, possibilities that could happen. But I also wanted for us to understand like the cause and effect, and learning from this housing element and understanding like the different approvals that we did in the past, like say for instance, the Quarry Creek, where we decided to build apartment structures in the Northeast area. The city, the planning team, I think whoever it was, decided that we would reduce the number of parking for this housing. And whatever we did, that's fine, I understand that. But the effects of this is, if you were to take a look at one of the main arteries on the street, and now you have a lot of cars parking on the side of a street on bike paths that are occupying that lane, just because the community is saying that, there's not enough parking. So, those are the things that I see, and those are the things that I really appreciate on working on this SMP, and how we're, really searching to seek and understand, what's going on within our community. But it's definitely something that I wish, we could really, I think we have a lot of, what we have here is great, but I definitely think we can dive deeper and coordinate and try and get this a little bit dialed in. But, coming from understanding how the end part is created, I really appreciate everyone's time and how they've really worked hard on getting this all together. Like Mr. Frank said, nothing can be perfect, but we're making progress and we're evolving to the next, we're moving to the next evolution. So I just wanted to leave it at that.
Okay. First, for the record, I would like to say that I had minimum input or help from my side. So thank you, Commissioner Linky, staff, Commissioner Pensier, and anyone else. And Commissioner Perez, because you were before me on the ad hoc. So thank you all. I see people coming in and out. I don't know if they're getting disconnected. I did see Commissioner Fowler and Ms. Ryan raising their hand. But before we go to more comments, we're being added for 2.5 hours. So what about 5-minute break? Yes, okay. So we'll be back, let's do 7 minutes at 5:40. Okay, so we're gonna move on.
Okay.
Just you can catch up, and it's no reason to keep everybody now, since it's already been almost 3 hours.
Okay.
We have everybody back. Unfortunately, we missed Ms. Ryan. I know she had questions, but unfortunately, we didn't get to her. I believe Commissioner Fowler, you had comments or questions?
So I just want to
I will make a comment, but I also want to make a motion. So obviously a lot of work has been done on this, and I have to say that the staff has been really open about taking suggestions and all the comments, criticisms, as it were, and things like that. And I think as a commission, we've had probably, and somebody can dispute this, but sort of unparalleled access to staff through the ad hoc committee. And they did a great job. And from what I hear, the staff was very, very responsive to it. Now, there are objections to it, and in looking at the objections, you have to, if the objections are too global to the plan, then you have to say, stop, we got to stop and start all over. If they're too small, you have to say, well, whatever, that will be taken care of as time goes on, or however you want to think about that. And so the question is, are these in the middle enough so that we can say, well, let's have another 3 meetings to kind of work on recommendations and things we'd like to change. Well, we've been doing this a lot for a long time. We've got our input, and it was well received. We didn't get everything that everybody wanted, but that's always typical in these matters. And not to devalue anybody's contribution or not, or the importance of what they're saying, but I think it's time to approve this. So I'm going to move that we recommend the adoption of the SMP straight up. And, we can decide, but I think we have to decide. I think we have to say, time is now, it's ready. We're not the only people involved in the input into this, and everybody's kind of in the same place, I imagine. Maybe some have stakeholders have mentioned their recommendation or whatever, but I think it's time. And so I'm moving to recommend the adoption of the SMP.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Do we have commissioner comments? Commissioner Linky.
I'd like to either request an amendment or offer a substitute motion to recommend adoption of the SMP, but that the chair and I work with staff to include a statement from the commission in the staff report about its limitations and the tasks that are now necessary to ensure successful implementation consistent with the first 2 slides I presented. So I'm not saying we shouldn't approve it. I'm saying we should approve it and be positive about it, but also just have a statement of the limitations and the necessary steps that needs to be taken.
Okay. I do want to say that I agree with Commissioner Fowler and Commissioner Linky. With Commissioner Linky, the main thing, and I know his concern, is that we do all this work, staff does all that work. I mean, we do a little bit, but staff does a lot of work, and it costs a lot of money. And our main concern is it going to be implemented? Or is it, we just do it to cross a checklist? So that's the main. And then Commissioner Fowler, yes, staff does a tremendous amount of work and been very, very, in compared to any other staff that we worked with, very responsive and cooperative with us. So if we can do anything that we can meet in the middle, I think it's great. So what are staff's comments on Commissioner Linky's request?
I think they're very appropriate. I mean, the limitations that he's provided, we intentionally, provided some next steps for a lot of these things, like the Safe Routes to School. We provided the initial framework, the feasibility. We provided the next steps for conducting the additional feasibility analysis. I generally agree with all of these limitations, and I think we can come up with a clear plan to address them. So I would agree.
Okay, so am I going with the revised motion, or should we vote on the first motion?
You can ask Commissioner Fowler if he wants to revise his motion.
So I think it would be okay either way, but I think, and thanks for Nathan for, sort of giving his blessing on additional information in that. So I'm open to
Revising your motion.
revising the motion, but I think we have to approve it unconditionally, right? So,
Okay, so we're playing the words game again.
I understand, but let me just say, there should be no ambiguity that we vote to approve it. But it's okay to say, having said that and having approved this, as a matter of good faith, these are the issues that we've identified that are important. And that's for an information to the city council, addressed to the city council. So I think that's appropriate, and I don't have any problem with that, so.
Okay, so who's going to state the motion with the addition of Commissioner Linky?
Well, let's hear from Commissioner Linky, how he wants to say it, because I think he said it pretty well, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can read it again. This would be Commissioner Fowler's motion, though. I move that we recommend adoption of the SMP, but that the Chair Gokin and Commissioner Linky work with staff to include a statement in the staff report about its limitations and the tasks necessary to ensure successful implementation.
Okay.
Would you be open to saying, because I think there's a word "but" there, and maybe I misread it, but maybe turn it into an "and."
And, okay. And the Chair Gokin and Commissioner Linky work with staff. That's great.
Okay, Commissioner Hunter, you still seconding?
I still second it, and I like the butt removed too, so.
Okay, let's go for a vote because I think we have plenty of discussion on it. And that reminds me, I don't know if any of you watched The Crown, but when they had the female prime minister, she played with one word for like weeks back and forth, just that one word. So yes, words are important. Okay, Ellie, you ready to go for a vote?
Yes.
And are you clear on the motion?
Yes, I got it. Thank you. So Commissioner Wanamaker is absent. Commissioner Linky,
Aye.
Commissioner Fowler,
Yes.
Commissioner Pensier,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunter,
Yes.
Vice Chair Perez,
Yay.
Chair Gokin.
Yes. Please note that it passed 6-1 with Commissioner Wanamaker being absent or temporary absent.